Brennan, and I'm very pleased to introduce someone I've known for a number of years and have worked with in Ontario, Canada, on a number of cohorts of mindfulness-based wellness and resiliency training. His name is Gary Meltzer, and he is from Georgetown, Ontario. Gary is a regular participant here on Wednesdays, and we also have a similar gathering for ministry personnel, Ontario Ministry of Solicitor General, on Monday nights. And so Gary and I are together a couple times a week now. So Gary has nearly 2 decades of experience as a mindfulness practitioner. He is a facilitator for the CMPS Mindfulness-Based Wellness and Resiliency Program and a volunteer for Freeing the Human Spirit, which is a prison yoga and meditation volunteer program. Thanks for sharing your practice and your time and your expertise this evening, Gary.
Thank you, John. To begin with, I'd like to invite us all into a short practice. It'll have 2 components. We'll do our best to arrive here in our bodies and in this space. And then I'm going to offer what's going to be a sound meditation, sort of a guided sound meditation. And I'd like first to invite you to just find a good sitting position, one that's comfortable for you. As always, we practice self-care. All the instructions and all of the offerings will be invitational and optional. So find your sitting position, and if you are comfortable with closing your eyes, close your eyes. And if you prefer to keep your eyes open, just avert your gaze, lower your gaze away from the screen. And we'll begin by just becoming aware of our posture. A nice alignment of the spine. If you're sitting in a chair, you can sit with your body, your spine self-supported, or you can, if it's more comfortable for you, you can lean back into your chair. And then we'll move to the grounding sensations. Feet against the ground, your hands in whatever position they may be on your lap, on your thighs, hands together. And the points of contact where you touch your chair. And then begin to bring that awareness inward. I'd like to invite you to just notice the movement of breath as it moves in and out of the body. And in the beginning here, we're going to do just whatever normal breathing pattern is comfortable for you in this moment. Just notice how the air moves in and out of the body unrestricted. And notice the quality of your being as you sit here. You may have come from a busy day. You might be at the end of a shift. You may be just finishing dinner, whatever that is for you. Just as best you can, let's see if we can let go of past and future and just arrive here in the present moment. The grounding sensations help us bring us right into the present moment. And just notice the quality of your being right here and now. And whatever arises in the field of awareness, whether it's sounds or sensations, thoughts, that's all perfectly okay, but as best you can, bring the awareness back just to the experience of being here in the present moment. And what I'm about to introduce is a practice called Soham. It'll be a recording from an individual named Swami Jay. It's a yogic practice. It's a guided breathing practice. And basically it's a very simple practice. It's just breathing in and breathing out, but we're going to breathe in on sound and breathe out on sound. And the sounds will be so-hum, 2 syllables. Don't try to imbue any meaning or look for anything. Just as best you can, breathe with Swami Jay's voice. And if you like, you're all muted. When it comes to the hum part, hum, you can verbalize it because you're all muted. Nobody's going to hear you. And maybe you can add that extra component of the vibratory field. So we're working with the guided breathing practice that's going to have sound and it's going to have vibration if you're willing to verbalize it as you breathe out. And we'll go back up for 1 second because that did not go. So you just follow your breath as I redo this. I'll try it one more time. That is not working. We did this 3 times before, and for whatever reason, it won't work right now.
So Gary, you can relax. We're going to be able to edit this. It's no problem. If you want to try maybe going out of presentation mode back to design mode and then share from there, then go back into presentation mode, that may ensure that you've selected share sound. And when you click right on that speaker icon.
Well, let's see. For some reason, I will try it again. And we'll just go through this magic screen share again. Okay, try number 3. just allow your awareness to return to just the normal breathing pattern. And as best you can, just notice if there was anything that came up during that practice in breathing, and maybe record it. And at the end, we may have an opportunity to speak about that practice. So I'd like to invite you to gently open your eyes, take a couple of intentional breaths. And if you wish, you can stretch or move, whatever works for you in this moment. And we'll say that Swami Jay just didn't want to cooperate today, that's all. And the title of this is Common Threads, Universality of Practice and Finding Your Own Path. And basically, I was playing with a bunch of ideas when I offered this, similar to something that Richard did last week. This is kind of extracted from another presentation I did a while ago, and I added a couple of things, and I took a few things out. And I wanted to try and create something where there's some room, because it's a longer presentation, some room for sharing at the end. So I'll see if I can keep this clock moving and create some free time at the end. And basically, this is just a perspective that I've taken. I think all of us have been introduced to a myriad of practices, especially each year as they go on. It's just like they keep flooding in. More and more practices, different forms of mindfulness and neuroscience, and it just keeps coming in. And the thing that I noticed quite a while ago, and I'm sure all of you have noticed, is this question that arises. Okay, which one is the one I should be doing? What's going to have benefit for me? What practice will answer maybe a question of stress or anxiety or other issues in our lives? And there's been wonderful presentations that have come up on this channel from this group, from this EMPS program. And we've kind of been coming at it in different areas. And John, last week, when we did this on Wednesday night, you were on retreat and you actually threw up this comment, there's many, many practices as you were doing your retreat. So I'm going to give you 4 or 5 different practices, if you want to call them practice, or teaching stories, anecdotes from different traditions, to try and see if I can weave these common threads into a bit of a tapestry. And it's a huge topic. How many practices are there? We'd never go through one of them fully in an hour. But what I was going to try and do is highlight a few practices that I saw kind of work with the same kind of a theme. And I probably could have left all those words out and just said how to live a virtuous life. And that was another comment that John made last week, and I thought he was segueing into my presentation tonight inadvertently, or who knows, maybe he knew. So what I'm going to do is come to you from different perspectives. And the first one I'm going to offer is from the indigenous tradition. And I think a lot of these practices, or a lot of these teaching stories, and I'm going to use a prayer, are things that everybody may know. Some of you may know all of them. Some of you may only know 1 or 2, and maybe some will be lost on. But this one is a famous story, and it's about a Cherokee elder and his 2 grandsons. And the Cherokee elder is sitting with his grandsons, and this is like a traditional rite of passage, an initiation sort of a story. And he says to his young grandsons, there's a war going on inside of me all the time, and the war is between 2 wolves. And the one wolf represents hatred and anger, jealousy and greed. And he starts to list a series of non-virtues. And then he says the other wolf represents kindness, and compassion and empathy and generosity and caring, and starts to list a series of virtuous behaviors. And he looks down at the boys somewhat seriously and he says, you know, this war is going on inside of me all the time, but not just in me, it's going on in both of you and in everybody. And as these stories go, you know, the one young boy is pretty smart and he's curious and he's hearing the story, and you know, there's a war going on and there's two wolves. So he says, well, grandfather, which wolf wins? And the grandfather looks down with a benevolent smile at his two grandsons and this knowing quality, and he goes, the one you feed. And we all know this intuitively. We all know this. It's very common sense. We've all had that experience. If you feed hatred, it grows stronger. If you feed anger, it grows stronger. And if you feed generosity or love, they grow stronger. So the idea is whatever we practice grows stronger. And I didn't cue this up, but at the end, maybe when we're speaking, I'll find it. Shauna Shapiro did a wonderful TED talk, about 13 minutes long, actually titled, What You Practice Grows Stronger. It's a little story of her going to India to study meditation and learn the 5 important words. What you practice grows stronger. And the next slide is the prayer of St. Francis. And I learned this, and it always gets challenging when you offer stories, teachings, prayers, whatever they are, because you learn them from whoever you got them from. And there's always different language, and, you know, hopefully we don't get too caught up in semantics or hermeneutics or whatever it is. But I'm going to repeat the prayer the way I learned it. And the way I learned it, the words may be a little bit different than the way you know it. But the prayer of St. Francis, and what's beautiful about St. Francis is he was probably the original environmentalist. You know, he was a naturalist, and he did prayers, or, you know, he preached to the birds and out in nature. And this is sort of indicative of where this prayer comes from. Lord, make me a channel or instrument of your peace. Where there's hatred, let me sow love. Where there's injury, pardon. Where there's doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O Lord, grant that I may never seek to be consoled as to console, not so much to be understood as to understand, and not so much to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. And it is in dying that we awake to eternal life. And I'd just like to maybe break that down a bit from the way I understand it and the perspective that I took. Where there's hatred, let me sow love. He's sowing seeds now. And we all know this concept, or this idea, or this metaphor, this symbol of sowing seeds. When we plant seeds, they may germinate, they may grow, and they may bear fruit. And what happens to the hatred? We're not sowing seeds for the hatred. We're not sowing seeds for the injury. We're sowing seeds for the pardon, for the doubt. No, for faith, we're going to sow those seeds. So he's separating feeding the earth, planting the seeds, from letting those other qualities go. And then in the next series of phrases, he says, grant that I may not seek to be consoled as to console. It's not so much about what I can get or for me and what is happening, and the focus is on me and my life and what I want. But he turns the camera, or the focus, out to who we can serve, who we can help. May I seek to console rather than be consoled. May I seek to understand rather than be understood. May I seek to love rather than be loved. So the focus is shifting from what I can get for myself in life to what I can give, which is such an important point and leads to the next series of phrases. For it is in giving that we receive. I think, again, we all know this from our own experience. How many times have we done some selfless act without anybody pushing or asking? No intention. In Buddhism, they call it royal giving, where you give where there's no expectation of something coming back. But that's selfless giving. And when we've done it, we've opened the door for somebody who is struggling with their groceries, or, something happened in our life where we were just giving because that's what people do. And then all of a sudden, even if there's no thanks or anything other than a thanks or no acknowledgement, there's something inside of us that's motivated. And often people are very generous with their kindness and words to say, thank you, I appreciate that. I mean, I'm looking at you with the eyes of appreciation and love. And it's through giving that we receive. Sometimes we receive tenfold what we give out. And then the next phrase is, it's in pardoning that we are pardoned. I'd just like to think about that for a minute, especially in the environment of, prison work, which I volunteered for, and a number of people on this call, I'm sure, are doing work in prison, and we've had, presentations by people who do that work. To err is human. Everybody knows that phrase, and we know that when we work in the system, where the criminal justice system, that there are people who have misstep. They've made mistakes and they're being punished for their behavior or moving outside of the law. But we've made mistakes as well. We're not perfect. We've done things that we regret. We've misspoken at times. We may have inadvertently harmed people through our actions or our words. And then how do we forgive ourselves? It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. When we have that capacity to forgive others, we're indirectly or directly forgiving ourselves. And we know that phrase, to err is human, but the full phrase is, to err is human, but to forgive is divine. And we know this also in our understanding of the phrases from Jesus. Lord, forgive them, for they know not what they've done. This idea of forgiveness, this divinity, is something that I think we can focus on. And then the last phrase is, it is in dying that we awake to eternal life. And it may have been meant that you go to heaven and you spend eternity with your Maker. I'm not exactly sure what St. Francis was meaning, but the way I took it was, it's the death of the ego. The ego, to me, is where we get into our problems. When I have a strong ego structure that's moving, there's me here and what I can get for myself, and then there's you, and there's the others over there. So we separate. We're not connected. But when we have that selfless experience, that giving, that forgiveness, when there is no ego, we're connected to all beings equally. And that's something that I really took to heart when I started repeating this prayer. I started with my yoga teacher initially on a weekly basis, and then I just adopted it as a daily practice. I repeat this prayer every single day. And I always think that, again, we're dealing with sowing seeds and nurturing and cultivating something and not feeding other things. So the death of the ego, to me, is the doorway to total connection to eternal life, in a sense. And that's just my perspective. Others will have their own. The next practice came from a book by the Dalai Lama, which I read very long ago, and it's how to practice the way to a meaningful life. And basically, in the Tibetan tradition, so we've had the indigenous tradition, then we had the Christian tradition. Now we're going into the Tibetan tradition. And in this book, it has morality as one of the chapters. And they talk about the 10 non-virtues and the 10 virtues. So here again, we're talking about virtuous behavior. And sometimes Buddhism is very pithy, as is this one. And this teaching was, we have the 10 virtues and the 10 non-virtues, and how do you incorporate the virtues in your life? Well, you adopt the 10 virtues and you abandon the non-virtues. So what is adopt and abandon? When we adopt something, what we practice grows stronger. What we feed has life. And when we abandon something, we're starving it, we're letting it be, we're not feeding it. And I just felt that even in this simple, the words I didn't give exactly like it's in the book, but it says, identify the 10 non-virtues, identify the 10 virtues, which are the opposite of the non-virtues. Abandon the former and adopt the latter. I printed it out opposite than the way it's in the book. Pretty straightforward. Just abandon and adopt. And this next practice is from Thich Nhat Hanh. So this is a Zen practice, and Thich Nhat Hanh, who died just over a year ago, was a Zen master. And this slide is from an actual retreat that I was very fortunate to attend at Brock University, a retreat for educators. And the way he teaches, I mean, this is a whiteboard. He draws a circle with a bunch of dots and a line through it. And he's talking about mental formations. And he's so simple and to the point. I love Thich Nhat Hanh. And basically the circle bisected, and then the bottom of the circle represents store consciousness. That's how he labels it. So store consciousness, or the unconscious, has all these little dots and crosses down at the bottom. And he didn't say why one was a plus or one was a dot, but they're representing seeds again. Here we are with seeds of mental formations. So that's his term for these qualities of mind, or these qualities of character. And the dots represent the unskillful or unwholesome mental formations, and the pluses or the X's represent the wholesome or the skillful or the virtuous. And basically how he describes this, he says, and we know this from our teaching, when the causes and conditions come together, and in our practice with MBWR, we call them triggers. When we're triggered, hatred, anger may arise. And he shows it as a sort of the line rising to the circle, which is like a bubble. And if anger is triggered, or if the causes and conditions come together for anger to arise, it moves above the line into the mind or into consciousness. And now Thich Nhat Hanh introduces the term mindfulness. He says mindfulness touches this seed that has come up into consciousness, and it discerns whether it's wholesome or unwholesome. If it's unwholesome, it leaves it alone and it goes back down into store consciousness. And he goes through a litany, hatred, anger, the same qualities that we've been talking about all along. And then he says if a wholesome quality rises up, and we know the same thing happens. We may be motivated, we may be the causes and conditions for us to be loving, to be kind, to be caring, to be generous. And these seeds come up into the mind. He said mindfulness touches that, recognizes its wholesome qualities, and you water those seeds. So it's just such a beautiful and a simple teaching. You water the seeds of these wholesome qualities, these wholesome mental formations. And again, what happens when we add water to seeds? They may germinate. And if we give them the necessities for life, they may grow and prosper and bear fruit. But there's a couple of things about his talk that is so important, and I just want to emphasize that. Just because we've discerned that a seed was unwholesome or non-virtuous, we don't feed it. The seed loses its energy and goes back down into store consciousness. You don't deal with anger once and it disappears and you never have to deal with it again. It remains in store consciousness. And the word that I like to use for this is it remains in potentiality. If the causes and conditions come together, if we're triggered again, that same seed will try to come back up into the mind and take over and dominate. So we don't get rid of these things, and all seeds for all qualities are in all beings. We have the seeds for anger, for violence, for love, for generosity. All of those things are within all of us, but the potentiality is down in the unconscious or store consciousness. And the other beautiful thing he says, which I love, is he says, you water the seeds of skillful or wholesome behavior or qualities. You don't water the seeds that are of the negative or the harmful or the unwholesome or the unskillful. And he says, call this selective watering. So we are selectively watering which seeds. And again, here we go. You know, we had the two wolves, and one wolf was the wolf of the virtuous qualities. One was the wolf of the non-virtuous, and we feed the wolf. We water the good seeds. We adopt the virtuous. We sow the seeds for St. Francis. So we can see that this is where I was sort of aiming at, that there's a common thread that runs through all of these different practices. Now, I appeal to all of you. I mean, I'm sure you can come up with some yourself, and you may have better examples than me. I just have to work within a short period of time, so I can't go too much further than that. So what I'd like to do now is engage in another short practice. And I want to introduce this practice, and again, we'll do it just as we did in the beginning. This is practice you have to incorporate self-care. I don't know anyone's history, and I don't want to try, and it's going to involve some guided imagery, and I don't want to inadvertently introduce something that may not be kind or caring for you. So you must practice self-care. And in this practice, I want you to be very gentle with yourself. So find your position again. You know the instructions. Whatever is comfortable for you to sit, and then bring that awareness inward. You can gently close your eyes if that's comfortable for you, or you can lower your gaze and begin again by just bringing your awareness of what is. And in your environment, maybe there's sounds that are arising, and just notice them. Or maybe there's sensations in the body, and you may be somewhat triggered or somewhat activated by things that have been said. And just notice if there's energy moving in the body, and see if you can just breathe with that, let it ease. And just let the breath be whatever it is at this moment, and just take a few moments to just ease into this state of beingness. Notice the quality of your being as you sit here. And this practice is going to have some guided imagery with it. And again, just be gentle. And I want to begin by having you think of a time where you're nearing the end of your life. Now, this may be somewhere further down the road, of course. And I want to just assure you that you're not in discomfort and you're not in pain. You may be sitting in a bed or lying down, but you're just reflecting on the arc of your life. And the suggestion, and I want you to be very, like a little bit of a curious or an investigator in this. I want you to bring to mind two good deeds that you've done in your life. And as best you can, see if you notice the first two that came up, and knowing that you've probably done multitudes of good deeds in your life, but just see which are the first ones that come to mind. And let them marinate for a bit and just breathe with them. And then I want to invite you to take this practice a little bit deeper and maybe use the imaginal, almost like a dream state, where you're back in the time and place when these good deeds, or you can just choose one, when this good deed occurred. Maybe you'll notice the surroundings, the smells, the sights, the environment, the feeling. If there were other individuals around, notice who they are, as if this experience was actually in the imaginal was happening right now. And again, just breathe with it. Just notice what comes up. And then we're going to take one more step a little bit deeper. And I want to invite you to bring the awareness into the body, sort of from the neck down. It's almost like doing a reverse body scan. Notice if there's any parts of the body that have been activated that are speaking to you. Notice if there's any parts of the body that have shifted. Notice any feeling tones. And see if you can locate where they are. What does this reflection on two good deeds do in the body? Now I want you to release this practice. Come back to your breathing naturally. Let go of the contemplation. Maybe take a few nice deep cleansing breaths to bring you back into the present. And when you're ready, you can gently open your eyes and become aware of being here in the present once again. And maybe just like with that first practice we did earlier, just note I hope we'll have some time for discussion in a few minutes. Just note if anything came up that maybe you want to speak to or share in a few moments. So this last little bit I want to read is from a book called The Path with Heart by Jack Kornfield. He wrote this book in the early 90s. And the practice we just did is actually from page 13. And what I'm going to read is from page 12. So it was from the first chapter. And the title of this chapter is, Did I Live Well? And this is going to be a teaching from Don Juan to Carlos Castaneda. And I'm going to read the paragraph where he introduces this little teaching, and then I'll read the paragraph that is the teaching itself. So Jack Kornfield is writing, in the beginning of a genuine spiritual journey, we have to stay much closer to home, to focus directly on what is right here in front of us, to make sure our path is connected with our deepest love. Don Juan, in his teachings to Carlos Castaneda, put it this way, and this is the teaching from Don Juan. Look at every path closely and deliberately. Try it as many times as you think necessary. Then ask yourself and yourself alone one question. This question is one that a very old man asks. My benefactor told me about it once when I was young and my blood was too vigorous for me to understand it. Now I do understand it, and I will tell you what it is. Does this path have heart? If it does, the path is good. If it doesn't, it's of no use. And what I've heard Jack Kornfield say that in a talk, and he usually finishes by saying, well, choose a path with heart. So I was trying to tie in a number of different practices and approaches and teaching stories. And this question is going to come up with all of us all the time. You know, how, like Thich Nhat Hanh said, you know, use your discernment, right? Mindfulness. How do we discern what is a wholesome seed and what's an unwholesome seed? At some point, we've got another question that arises. And for those of you who've worked in prisons, and I know I've been in the same institution with Sue Hiltz, on the walls in the classrooms, OCI is a treatment center, they have a lot of 12-step programs, and on the wall and on the blackboard, they have this this saying, and we all know it, I'm pretty sure. It's, Lord, give me the serenity to accept things I cannot change, the courage to change things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And here again, wisdom to know the difference. I like to think of that as mindfulness, the same mindfulness that Thich Nhat Hanh was introducing. But again, we're still left here hanging, sure, on the ends of the spectrum between virtue and non-virtue, or wholesome and unwholesome. We know that, you know, premeditative murder is going to be as non-virtuous as you can get, and, you know, giving food to a poor family or something like that is virtuous, but there's that gray area in the middle. And one of my principal teachers, who I knew of in the 60s when he was a professor at Harvard, and then started studying and reading Ram Dass in the 70s, and then as I continued with practice later on, I went back to Ram Dass. And his approach is, when talking about these same sort of subjects, is, in the end, we have to trust our intuitive heart. There's that capacity in each one of us to know what's wholesome and what's unwholesome. There's that innate ability. And if there are some contrarians here, you're going to say, well, I work with some sociopaths and some psychopaths, and they have no capacity for compassion or empathy. So we'll say that's the exception. There are brains that were misformed or damaged through illness or accident, and that does exist, of course. But we're talking about the vast majority of all of us. And we have that innate ability to know. And that is what is sort of embedded in all of this. We have to trust our intuitive heart. And it's interesting, and I'm just going back because I remember Katie Carlson did a presentation, and one of her titles was "Trusting the Intuitive Heart." So it's what we come down to. My title was "Finding a Path." Well, I'm using Jack Kornfield's idea that, does this path have heart? If it does, it's good, and if it doesn't, it's of no use. So what is a good path? What is a bad path? What is virtuous? What is non-virtuous? What is wholesome and unwholesome? And then we come back to trust our intuitive heart. And I think embedded in all the practices that have been brought up by the Center for Mindfulness here, and all the practices that we try to engage in for our own edification and for our facilitation to help others with their anxiety or their life situation, we're looking for those qualities, and that's why I chose the words a universality in practice. These common threads that we weave together, this tapestry that exposes the better angels of our being. So that's all I had to say. I want to thank everyone for allowing me to be here and to offer this practice, and thank Robert. And one last thing, and I have to say this, when I was asked by Robert if I wanted to do this presentation, he said, I'll stop sharing now. He said, would you like to do a presentation? And I said, sure. But it's probably not going to be a presentation that's exactly like some of the skills and practices that we normally do in MBWR. I'm probably going to drift a little bit off to my own sort of perspective. And he says, you know, Gary, the way I see it, it's not either or. It's yes and. And I want to thank you for those comments, Robert, because that's so welcoming, and that's the way I see it as well. I'm not trying to negate any of the practices that we do, but merely confirm them or affirm them, and then introduce other ones. And I didn't say this, but I got to say it real quick because I want to leave as many moments as possible for you. The So-Hum, which was a bit of a stumble, I don't know why it worked twice with John and I before, and then same screen, boom, it didn't work. But that's a breathing practice, and I wanted to juxtapose it because Richard and John have been talking about breathing and creating the pause, and of course extending the exhalation, which we know helps downregulate the nervous system. And that's just another twist, another look. It's a 4-second interval, if you timed it, which I have, for breathing in for so, and a 6-second interval for hum, which is 10 seconds. That's 6 cycles a minute. When we do straw breathing, we go 4 and 8, which is 12. That's 5 cycles a minute. And as John said just last week, the optimum that has been discovered is between 5 and 6 breaths a minute. So we're right there in the wheelhouse. It's just another thing. And all these practices you can take and use, and they're all available. And the simple teaching stories is what I like. I'm done. Now we'll leave it open for any sharing that anybody wishes to throw in there.
Since you went back to So-Hum, it reminded me, before I went through mindfulness teacher training, before Center for Mindfulness and Public Safety, I'd had a meditation practice, but it was something that I just kind of picked up from places over time, and there was a lot of mantra in it. So for many years, my meditation was almost solely to mantra, and like So-Hum and other things. And, in mindfulness, I've moved away from that in my meditation, mostly to, my breath and stuff like that. But practicing it tonight, oh my gosh, it felt so comfortable. And it just reminded me how much, how mantra is just such a kind of not, strong way for me to be able to stay, connected to a practice and breath. And I hadn't done it in a while. So it was very nice to practice tonight. Thank you. And wonderful presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, Gary, thank you. Very rich. There's so much there that we could reflect on. The one thing that I want to really appreciate is your mentioning of discernment, because there can be misinterpretation, and sometimes there is a misinterpretation that mindfulness is kind of makes us blank, or that makes us, there's a worry, I can just become a zombie. I'll just be this gentle jelly, donut. And discernment is very much at the heart of many aspects and many qualities within mindfulness. So actually our awareness at the present moment, internally and in the external environment, really refines our discernment, our understanding of what's going on and the potential to what can be going on, and to discern all of those things, right from wrong, valuable from what might want to be abandoned. And so I just really want to appreciate that. And it's something in the Engaged Mindfulness Institute teacher training that we talk about and really want to affirm, that discernment is something we can cultivate. And all of these practices are cultivating practices. And so I just appreciate that.
Thank you, John.
Gary,
I'll mention
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I just want to say, Gary, that you really gave us the both and tonight. And, there's no easy answers, but there's a whole breadth of knowledge and experience and history that do have the core, the central threads that weave through them, and we kind of make our own tapestry. But you provided a lot of, not only room for thought and discernment, but just the experience. And really, I've not been somebody who's done a lot of the humming. I'm really getting to be quite fascinated with it, and really think it does good things for the body and the mind to do it. So I appreciate that as well. So thank you for the effort and for joining us tonight and sharing. And we love having you here every Wednesday.
I was saying, Gary, we could have a long conversation. Thank you so much for those rich stories and reminding me of some of them, because it's been a long time since I've heard them. So it's very, very delightful. And wow, so much there. I remember Joseph Campbell saying that the mind or the brain is a secondary organ and needs to be in service of the heart. So it really kind of comes back to that, one of, does this path have heart? And then we need to figure out how we're going to go down the path, so the brain can have its role. But very much well done, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Richard.
I wanted to mention also behind me, underneath the prayer flags, that's a statue of Saint Francis. So he's been in our Zoom this whole time.
That's great. And I'm just going to add that my yoga teacher did a meditation every week before our yoga class, and whoever wanted to come came. And she was the one who introduced that version of the prayer of St. Francis. And I did it, weekly for a number of years. And then all of a sudden, I was in another group, and we were recommended to do it every day, which we did. And then it just became part of my silent practice. I do it every day.
I think I want to come back to John's comment about discernment. And the prayer of St. Francis speaks of a very lofty relationship to the world. And, there is the risk for those who are, we call, wounded healers, who are going around and helping the whole world, yet they're carrying the wound. So I think there needs to be a caution there that, that I'm not sure how many of the teachers on self-compassion said basic compassion begins with you, begins with self, and then it's extended out. So I think that like to say almost everything that I would talk about that's worth even speaking about, I kind of start with it's complex. And so I want to make sure that we're kind to self along the way, because we can certainly deplete ourselves in service of others, and then not being kind to self, and then obviously not being able to fully give because our cup is not being filled. So it is a balance there.
What's interesting, and I didn't want to dominate this free period, but there is, I've went through, I don't know how many practices. I started one on depression and anxiety for 4 weeks today. And I see these things, these same themes coming up over and over. That's why I took that sort of twist of common threads and looking for that. And John Main, are you familiar with John Main, Richard? John Main was I'm a priest. I lose track of what, spiritual names are applied to which person, Thomas Merton, Brother Steindl Ras, you have these names, and sometimes I'm confused. But he was he promoted centering prayer, and he actually came to Canada for a while. Lawrence Freeman is one of his disciples who carries on John Main's teaching. And John Main's suggestion was, he said, the model was you find God, and through God you love the community, and through loving the community you learn to love yourself. And he said, I think that's backwards. I think you first find out how to love yourself, and through loving yourself you can then extend that into the community, and through loving yourself and the community you come to the essential love of God. And that was just one of, it sounded as if you were going to go there. That's why I mentioned it. But centering prayer is something that we've been introduced to in a number of groups, which is very much like any other Buddhist equanimity type of a prayer.
I'd like to add one more thing, but I'll acknowledge that it's 9 o'clock here for John. But last night I was listening to an interview with, I don't know how to say it, Gabor Mata, yeah. Okay. And he was speaking about trauma. He was talking about trauma, and basically he said that, you're either moving in a direction of healing action of your trauma or non-healing action to your trauma. You're either kind of moving, depending on, what you do from each way, that you're either moving in one way or the other. And I thought that was really interesting, and it gave me a lot of clarity for something I'd been thinking about. And so, but I think that makes a lot of sense with the planting the seeds and those two different sides with the trauma kind of awareness and sensitivity, of knowing that that kind of decision making will probably be easier with your own healed trauma, and not, your own wounded, your wounds kind of going out. If they're out, then you're not moving in a direction to heal them, I guess, something like that.
That's great. Thank you.
Sherry, I wonder if you had something you wanted to offer.
I think it's a little bit late, so I think my comment might be something of more of a narrative kind of a thing. So we'll do another day. We'll have another day.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Gary, for taking your time and all the effort to put this together, sharing these stories with us. Very rich. Appreciate it.